Hey y'all, I'm recording this video as a guide and overview to our upcoming Bible study passage, the Unforgiving Servant, found in Matthew 18:21 through 35. So please read through the passage on your own. I want to make a few observations on it though. First of all, the Pharisees and religious leaders of Jesus' day taught that you only had to forgive someone up to 3 times. And they developed this understanding from a passage in Amos where God forgave the iniquities of his people 3 times before casting judgment upon them. Peter, recognizing that Jesus is much more righteous than the Pharisees, doubles that and adds one just for good measure. And when he's asking up to 7 times, he's not trying to place a limit on forgiveness. Contrary, he's actually trying to broaden it. But Jesus makes it clear that forgiveness and grace has no limits. Whether your translation says 70 times 7 or 77, the point remains that there is no limit on the grace and forgiveness that we, as followers of Christ, are meant to extend. We have 3 characters within this story and 2 debts. One servant is indebted to his master, and his debt is 10,000 talents. To put that into perspective, 1 talent is 20 years worth of debt. 10,000 talents would therefore be 200,000 years of debt. If this servant gathered 100 of his friends and began working to pay off his debt when Christ died in 33 AD, they would still have 8 more years to go to pay it off. The point is clear. This servant can never pay that back. Another servant is indebted to his fellow servant by 100 denarii. 1 denarius was the going rate for a day's labor. In essence, this servant's debt is minuscule compared to the other. Even beyond the monetary differences between these 2 debts, which debt is more significant? If you owed your bank and your friend $100 both, but you didn't have the money to pay them both at the same time, who would you pay for first? Well, you'd probably pay the bank. Therefore, even if both servants' debts were 100 denarii, the fact that the first servant's debt is with his master makes it much more significant than his fellow's debt to him. The crux of the story is in how the characters respond to these debts. Both servants, when confronted with their debts, plead for mercy and for time. I think it's significant that they don't ask for forgiveness, but instead for an opportunity to make amends themselves. How often do we ask God for the same? Not forgiveness, but for more time to pay off our debts to him. Now, when the first servant pleads with the king forgives his debts. How relieved must the servant have felt to have the burden of 200,000 years of debt lifted off his shoulder with just one act of mercy. Unfortunately, it's short-lived as he soon uses his newfound freedom to choke his co-worker over 100 denarii. Though his co-worker pleads for mercy much the same as he had just pleaded with his master, he gives none, and instead he throws his co-worker into prison. How can his coworker ever pay off his debts now if he cannot work? This is what happens when you hold a grudge against someone. You've thrown them into a prison they can never escape, and they can never make amends with you. Now, when the king hears of this atrocity, he gets angry and throws the first talent into prison until his 10,000 talents worth of debt should be paid. Is the king's anger justified? Is it righteous? Further, if this parable is teaching about the kingdom of heaven, do these verses speak to the eternality of hell? At the start, the first servant asked for more time to pay off his debt. What he received initially was undue forgiveness and mercy, and in the end, he received exactly what he had asked for because of his hardness of heart. So, what prompted Jesus to tell this parable in the first place? Well, just before, Jesus had taught his disciples about forgiveness and reconciliation. Notably, Jesus says to confront your brother in his sin in order to reconcile. He says you will gain your brother if he listens to you. That should always be the intention behind a Christian confrontation, never judgment or humiliation. Again, Christ makes his point clear when he says, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Unreconciled relationships in this life have consequences in the next life. What those consequences are, you can ponder. As mentioned earlier, we have 3 characters in the story, and I don't have too much to say on these 3 other than the basics. The merciful king, he represents God. I see that he displays patience in his anger. This is the initial confrontation with the first servant. When he asked for his debt to be paid off, the king gathers up the servants' families and sells them off. There's still a lot of patience even in that response, as you'll see when we get to the unforgiving servant. He forgives his servant and expects his servant to forgive others. The unforgiving servant is infamously unforgiving. He is indebted to his master, and he is wrathful despite being shown mercy. And again, I can't stress the contrast between the king's response to his servant and the servant's response to his coworker. The servant's response was to choke him out. So again, the fellow servant represents your neighbor, your enemy, your peer, anybody in your life, and he is indebted to the first servant. He's also imprisoned by another's grudge. So what are some core teachings from this? Well, for Christians, the debt another one has against them may not feel as insignificant as 100 denarii. What is a Christian to do when he is struggling to forgive and when he doesn't want to forgive somebody? There's no simple answer to this, but certainly at the foundation of a Christian's ability to forgive others is a recognition of how much they have been forgiven. Well, forgiven for what? I'm not so bad. Well, perhaps you haven't accrued much sin through your actions, but sin is more than just bad actions. Sin is a condition, like mold on bread or rust on steel. From the very womb, we are all stained with the sin and corruption of this world, yet even these stains we have been forgiven and cleansed. And besides, even a small scratch on your soul is worth millions in damages. As Christians, we are not our own, but instead we belong to God. When you rent an apartment, are you not concerned about damages to the walls or stains in the carpet? And when the lease is close to expiring, do you not attempt to clean and fix and de-stain everything? Therefore, if our own self, our body, our mind, our heart, and our soul is on loan from God, how much more grievous the stains on our heart and the scratches in our soul, especially when we cannot patch them or remedy them by our own efforts. Another teaching is that of holding grudges. While I've heard the analogy that holding a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, I think I like this analogy more of throwing them into prison. Holding a grudge isn't just an action against myself, it's an action against another. I have set up a wall against someone, and I will never let them near again unless they can make amends. But they can't make amends because there's no way to get near. The other party is trapped in my own prison, and who can set them free but myself through forgiveness? Every great Bible study includes cross-references to other parts of the scripture. Please read through these passages on your own, but I believe these will add to your understanding of this parable, especially Luke 7, verses 36 through 50. Importantly, in Matthew 20:28, Jesus states his mission here on earth is to give his life as a ransom for many. I'll expound on that idea later to see how it changes the parable in a way. I won't spend too much on these questions. I just encourage you to pause the video and look for any questions that you like. I do want to point out this question though, as it relates back to my thoughts regarding Matthew 20:28. If this parable portrayed the gospel message more accurately, the master's son would have come between the master and the servant and paid the servant's debts. How does this twist on the story affect your understanding of the forgiveness of sins that we have through Christ? Thanks for taking some time to watch this video and just be a little bit more prepared for our upcoming Bible study.